At launch, the FX3 was a game-changing camera, and it's become one of the most popular video cameras. But the FX3 is 3 years old, and the sensor is actually 10 years old. So is the FX3 still worth it, and why? Or is there something better out there? Well, the answer is pretty complicated, so let's talk about it. So most people imagine the FX3 is some godlike camera because it has amazing image quality, but actually it's not image quality, but rather quality of life. The FX3 makes the process of shooting and being creative extremely easy and efficient. And all of this is possible because of the amazing design of the FX3. The body is a magnesium alloy that's only 1.5 pounds or 750 grams with the battery and cards, so you can pretty much use this as a gimbal camera, a suction mount camera and attach it to a car, or even a handheld camera very easily. And it actually has 5 1/4-inch screw holes built directly into the body, so you don't need an extra cage for accessories. And that right there is anywhere between $150 to $350 safe. And it also has a 1/4-inch screw hole both on the left side and right side of this camera, so you can mount it vertically. And it also has a built-in fan for unlimited record time. This camera is basically impossible to overheat. And all of the major buttons on the FX3 have also been moved to the top, so you can easily look down while shooting handheld, or while it's on an easy rig, and you can easily control your camera without needing a second assistant. Also, I'll leave links down below for the best pricing on the FX3. Now, one of my favorite features about the FX3 and why I think it's such a popular video camera is actually the lens mount and the features that support it, like autofocus and stabilization. I recently shot a music video where I did not have the budget for a wireless follow focus system or a focus puller. And on this video, there was a lot of movement, so manual autofocus was completely out of the question. And I ended up shooting this entire video using autofocus lenses on the FX3, and I was absolutely blown away by how well the autofocus performed. The autofocus itself did not miss a single shot on the entire music video because it has face and eye tracking, and I actually think it did a better job than a real focus puller. In this shot, it's able to go between the face and the hands in a split second that a real focus puller would have missed. But it can get confused if something else passes in the frame, so you have to watch out. And I shot most of this music video on a gimbal, but I did have a few handheld shots, but you almost can't tell that it's handheld because the stabilization is so good, and any little imperfection I could easily fix with Warp Stabilizer. Or you can also use the Sony Catalyst browse software for additional stabilization, and this stabilization software works really well because it actually uses the movement data from the FX3 that it records internally. And I used Sony lenses on this project because I needed the autofocus, but realistically, Sony cameras with E-mount have infinite options. Tamron, Sigma, Zeiss, Viltrox, Samyang, and many more all make lenses for Sony with autofocus. Plus, you also have the ability to adapt PL lenses, which are cinema lenses, to this camera as well. So you really have any lens you want available to you. And you can even use Canon EF or L lenses with an adapter, and the autofocus still works great. And the FX3 also comes with an audio top handle that plugs directly into the flash mount to give you a digital audio input. But with this audio top handle, you can actually have an XLR mic input directly into the camera. Now, this is not something you really see on cameras that are this small, and you really don't see it on cameras unless they're proper expensive, like $8,000 to $10,000 cinema cameras. And this top handle actually comes standard as part of the FX3 package. So within the $4,000 or so that you'll spend on this package, you get the top handle with it. And this top handle also has the ability to do channel switching, so you can choose what channel your mics are recorded to, because it does have 2 separate XLR inputs. But on top of that, it also has a built-in attenuator and low cut filter, so you can really set up your audio to sound great in camera. But if you want something a little bit cheaper, you can also look for a used FX3 that doesn't have the top handle to save a little bit of money. Now, it's nice to have this top handle as part of the standard package, but it's a little bit short and it's hard to get a proper grip on it. And once you're holding it, you don't really have enough room for a monitor as well. So I recommend buying a top handle extension to get a little bit more room on the back, so you can properly hold it and also have more room for monitors and accessories. And if you're gonna use this camera properly, you should 100% be thinking about accessories to properly rig up this camera. And this is the rig that I actually use not only for the FX3, but for most of my camera setups. And this rig is actually from Condor Blue. On my setup, I've actually got 2 side handles that are adjustable so I can get a grip in any position. The side handle on the left is actually a cowboy style handle with a built-in start and stop button for recording that connects to the camera via a cable. But my favorite thing on this setup is actually this battery plate on the back that has two P taps and two PD power out ports, which are USB Type-C ports. And on top of that, it also has an 8-volt and a 12-volt power out port. Basically, that's a fancy way of saying that I can power not only the camera, the monitor, but also a wireless follow focus unit and a wireless video entirely through this battery plate. And this whole setup just makes the FX3 feel more like a proper cinema or production camera. And this setup also makes using the FX3 or any other camera I'm running on it a lot more fun to use. And if you want to get a proper rig for your setup, I highly recommend checking out Condor Blue. Not sponsored, I just like their stuff. Now, the sensor and processor combo is why most people get excited about the FX3, and fair enough, it's a gorgeous sensor, but no matter how you slice it, the technology in this camera is getting kind of old. The FX3 came out 3 years ago, and the sensor in this camera first came out in the A7S1, which was in 2015, so almost 10 years ago. So how could the FX3 possibly be keeping up with the newer, better, and cheaper cameras out there? Well, it's probably not for the reason you expected. And if you don't know, the FX3 has a full-frame 12 megapixel sensor that also has a dual native ISO of 800 and 12,800, making it a phenomenal low light camera and a very versatile camera for almost any sort of shooting. And can also do 4K in both UHD and DCI at true 24p, 30, 60, all the way up to 120 frames per second, and does all of this without any sort of quality compromise or downgrade. And funny enough, the FX3 is also a phenomenal photo camera. Despite having only a 12 megapixel full frame sensor, it takes stunning photos. The only issue here is you don't have a lot of resolution, so you can't really zoom into your photos, but for the most part, you can do everything you would do with a normal photo camera, and just because it's 12 megapixels, you're not going to get lower quality photos. But here's the cool thing, it also shoots 10 frames per second at 14-bit RAW with an unlimited frame buffer, so you can shoot up to 1,000 photos in a row before this camera needs a break. But the FX3 goes even further. It has the same color size as the Sony Cinema line of cameras with S-Log3 and 10-bit color and a high bitrate codec that is anywhere between 250 megabits per second to 600 megabits per second. I recently shot a music video with the FX3 and I was so impressed by how much dynamic range there was, how far you could push the colors, and the image just did not fall apart or start to have any sort of artifacting. Again, I'm only mentioning this so you know that I speak from experience and I'm not just BSing you, but I'm super impressed by what this camera can do. And if you really need to push the FX3 to its limits, you can also record ProRes RAW in 6K up to 60 frames per second via an Animus recorder. And The Creator, which was the main Hollywood movie shot on the FX3, was also shot in ProRes RAW. So when you look at it, the FX3 has all the frame rates, the editing tools, the workflow, and honestly, using this camera is a breeze. But here's the catch, and where things get confusing. For the same price as the FX3, I can also get the Nikon Z8, which shoots 8K at 12-bit internal RAW up to 60 frames per second, or 4K at 120 frames per second also in RAW, so I don't need an external recorder. Or I could get the little brother to the Z8, which is the Z6 Mark III, and that can shoot 6K up to 60 frames per second also in internal RAW. Or I could get another Sony camera like the Sony a7C II or the a7 IV, which has a 33 megapixel full frame sensor compared to the 12 megapixel full frame sensor in the FX3, and that also allows you to downsample your 4K from 7K, giving you the same detail and quality of 7K but in a smaller 4K file. And this is where it looks like the FX3 is showing its age, but that's only on paper. Because what people often forget is that while you do have 7K downsamples in the a7 IV and the a7C, you have a lot of rolling shutter because of that oversampling. And on top of that, the FX3 has virtually zero rolling shutter. It's very, very little. On top of that, while the Nikon Z8 can shoot 8K at 12-bit RAW internally, those files are massive. I ended up shooting 3 terabytes worth of footage in 3 days, and I wasn't even shooting at the highest bitrate. Those files are extremely difficult to work with, and you can only use that raw file in DaVinci Resolve. So if you're a Premiere Pro editor, you have to transcode your footage. And the Nikon Z8 does not have the same low light performance. It has a dual native ISO of only 800 and 4000, where the FX3 has 12,800. And while the Nikon Z8 is a phenomenal video camera, it's designed to be a hybrid photo and video camera. And the FX3 is really dedicated to being a proper video camera. So if I had to go on set, I would probably go with the FX3 because it's better made for my workflow on set. And the Nikon Z8 is a phenomenal camera. I recently shot a project with it, and if you can get around the non-cinema style body, it's a camera worth looking at. So if you made it this far into the video, or if you just skipped ahead because you're hurting my feelings, let's talk about, is the FX3 still worth getting? Well, if the main reason you want to get the FX3 is because of how it looks, or because they shot a Hollywood movie on it, you're going to be super disappointed. Because even when you talk to Gareth Edwards and Oren Safra, who shot The Creator, which is that Hollywood movie they shot on this camera, they always say something along the lines of, it was just a camera, we just needed something to get the job done. It wasn't because of the image quality, it's because this is a small and cheap camera, and they literally were able to have 6 of these on set at any time, set up in different ways for different kinds of shots. It wasn't because of how this camera looked, but this camera does look amazing. And if you do want the look of this camera, you could easily get the Sony ZV-E1, which has the same sensor, the same frame rates, the same codecs, but it's half the price. And some people say it overheats, but I've literally shot tons of videos on that camera, and it really doesn't overheat until you get to about an hour plus of shooting. So for most people, you'll be just fine, and you'll get the same look as the FX3. The main appeal of the FX3 is the design, because it's the smallest, cheapest cinema camera or pro video camera out there. There is literally nothing else that has these specs for this price and in this form factor with that audio top handle. It has everything you need for a proper professional workflow. But if you don't care that much about design and you're planning on rigging up your camera and it's really the image quality, frame rates that you want, along with low light, don't get the FX3. Either get the ZV-E1 for half the price or buy the Nikon Z8 with 8K at 60 frames per second, or there's even the Panasonic Lumix S5 IIX that has 6K open gate and is tremendous for anamorphic lenses. If you're really someone that's just focusing on image, the FX3 really isn't that appealing, but the design of this camera is amazing. If you're someone that's a professional, that's working day in and day out, and you need a workhorse of a camera, the FX3 is simply chef's kiss. And if you want to check out this camera and pick it up for yourself, I'll leave links down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.